don't think that you guys mentioned it in the book or maybe in passing, but the Asian designers that were basically the mothers of all of the newcomers were like Kawakubo, etc. But they typically cast like European white models, and they have very they just have really white castings, and that makes the racial imagining of the people that wear their clothing a lot different than what they're written about as. And I feel like they have always been like victim of very racist ways of writing about them. The Hiroshima chic stuff and all of that stuff. And like I remember, like, I think Yoji Yamamoto was considered like a sexless yogi or something at one point, which is completely antithetical to his work because his clothing is like incredibly sexy in a very particular context. And now I'm just going on a rant, but I'm just like,
speak truth.
Do you feel like this type of media coverage has changed at all whatsoever with the newer Asian American designers, and with people realizing that the Chinese consumer and like the Asian consumer is actually very powerful and is the market that they need to reach? Do you think that's changed at all? Is there hope?
So I do talk about this in the book, right? It's interesting, for example, if you look at, there is an increased attention to Asian luxury markets and even Asian kind of moderate priced markets, right? So that Gap closed down a bunch of stores in the United States and opened as many in China, for example, right? So there is an understanding that Asian consumers are important, but if you look at the magazines, the fashion magazines, so the Vogue, the China Vogue, and all the Asian magazines, the Asian editions of Western magazines that have popped up in the last 5 to 10 years, predominantly, something like 95% of the ads, of the covers are white, right? Not Asian American, not Asian, not African American, white, right? And so we're seeing not a whole lot changing. So, Thuy's point earlier that they want the cash, this is true. But the standards of beauty, right, largely are remaining pretty stable insofar as, but with these differences, right? So you have like sometimes Asian faces. The Susie Bubble did a Gap ad, for example. But if you look at the super bloggers, the Asian super bloggers, one of the things that they all have in common is that they're thin, they're cute, they're not model tall, but they are tall. They have very kind of they fit a very they fit very closely to a standard of beauty that is recognizable, but with that difference, right, of them being Asian. And so in that way, speaking in some ways to the Asian consumer market, and another point that I make is that it's not a coincidence that the Asian super bloggers are all from the English-speaking Asian diaspora, right? And part of it is technological, so that you have really huge, phenomenal fashion bloggers in China, but because they don't speak English as their first language and they don't blog in English, they're not legible to the Western industry. And also, oftentimes, they're using technologies that we don't have access to because they're state-run blogs or microblogs like Weibo, right? So, again, in some ways, the Asian super bloggers are really good cultural mediators because they move back and forth easily, but they also aren't. They're changing the fashion industry in micro ways, right? They're micro celebrities changing in micro ways, but they are not the Anna Wintours. They are not the the head of Balenciaga. They're not those people. So what they're doing is very much is situational more than structural.
Yeah, on the other hand, I do think, there is this kind of great sort of Euro-American fantasy that we're going to dump all our goods onto Asia and they're just going to buy what we give them, right? So, we used to dump cigarettes, but we can make much more money off bags, so we're going to do that next, right? But it hasn't quite been working out that way. And like in Vietnam, you can get instructions on how to put your outfit together at the Chanel boutique, right? They will show you how to do it just like them, right? And it hasn't really been working out quite that way. I mean, there are, of course, the sort of elite consumers who will buy that, but also there's a really increased circulation of cultural goods from within the region itself, right? So Korean fashion is doing extremely well in Southeast Asia, in China, right? And Korean cosmetics is just, right? And Asian cosmetics, right? This is the thing I've been working on, right? Love the snail, right? Love the snail, right? Has outsold, right? The traditional like French, right? Brands, right? That was the kind of global industry standard. It is no longer, right? So there are these kinds of regional dynamics that are sort of percolating up, right? That make this possibly this idea that like, you know, we'll just send it to you, right? Possibly a fantasy.
In addition to Korean beauty products, which I'm also a big fan of, as you all should be because they're amazing, Korean counterfeit handbags copied are like the best in the world. Really, really good. In fact, and fashion industry leaders will tell you that they are sometimes better than the real thing, right? And so the counterfeit market is this kind of burgeoning place where, you know, whereas the kind of public discourse about counterfeit goods in the United States is that it's all bad, but it wouldn't be the kind of huge industry that it is if people weren't buying it, right? So there's a lot of kind of moral panic without the actual, like it's more of a fake panic. But in Asia and Korea and China, where these kind of, I don't even know if they use the word counterfeit, but these kind of fake goods, right, are actually much cheaper, but also better, and they recognize it, and they don't, and there's not the same kind of stigma attached or the same kind of moral panic attached. And it is about fueling like a local economy, right, in ways that I think are really interesting. But it's not, it's what for the Western fashion industry, it sees it as a, you know, a black market or a deviant kind of economy.
Yeah, it's like ethically just not, it's a no-go. Yeah, and that's a question that I have about
the Western fashion industry copies all the time, right?
Yeah,
Can we
definitely.
Just say that? Yeah.
I mean, yeah, like especially with what the Met Gala, like Chinese whispers, like
oh God,
like
oh God.
that's like I just want to talk about that for a second. Like that was garbage.
Trauma. Yes.
They had like one Chinese design. Rihanna was the only person that wore a Chinese like
designer.
Couturier. Like, are you joking?
Yeah.
Like just the way that fashion navigates Orientalism is just appalling. Especially, I mean, I'm not gonna go on a rant. I promise I won't go on a rant. Okay, but my question, aside from that, is how can we navigate discussions and decisions about race and classism when it comes to purchasing things? Because the discussion is always like, don't buy from sweatshops, and sweatshops are people think that they're primarily in China and stuff, and then like when they see a made in China tag, people automatically assume that it's made under really bad conditions, when in reality most of the sweatshops or most of the factories in America now are operating under sweatshop conditions. But where is our conversation about ethics and purchasing going if knowing that activism isn't making people change their minds fast enough?
Well, that's, yeah. Besides, what do Asian people want? That's the other $1 million question, right? Yeah. You know, I think it's a really hard question, and it's a hard question because we live in an age where things are so interconnected that it's hard to piece out where the bad guys live and where the good guys live, right? You know, I mean, the Met exhibit, the China Met exhibit, was the most popular and well-attended exhibit in its entire 148-year history, right? And it was because it was driven by international visitors, mostly from China, right? And so, like, what are we negotiating there? I'm not entirely sure, right? And the idea that, you know, if it's made in China, it's in sweatshops, right? And if it's made in America, it's not, is completely ludicrous, right? Given the ways in which these things travel and the ways in which, for example, you know, in China, you know, you are seeing the development, right? And this is actually happening in Thailand, Cambodia, Vietnam. You're seeing the development of manufacturing factories, right, that are beautiful, bright, right, zero waste, right, sustainable, right, these massive, massive factories. And the reason they are, you know, zero waste is because they really, really care about not the environment, but like the loss of profit from the kind of waste that is done in most manufacturing. So you're seeing these kinds of models, right, of manufacturing that exist in China. At the same time, you see all these made in Brooklyn, made in LA, ethical, blah, blah, right, which when you start to scratch the surface, right, is like completely exploited labor. Right? So it's really hard in this moment to figure out exactly where the bad guys live so you can target them or avoid them, right?
So, one thing you could